friends, welcome to episode 9, the penultimate episode of season 1 of Hello Friends, the Mr. Robot and Review Show. My name is Kyle. I am your host as always. Thank you for joining me on the podcast here. And we're going to jump right into it here, episode 9 of Mr. Robot in Review, that I like to call The Grand Plan. So the plot is an illusion. So welcome to the year 1994. I was 3 years old at the time of this year happened. So this is a nice little flashback. We get an opening shot of the Mr. Robot computer shop, where we have some old monitors, some SNES games, and we have a cut of Mr. Robot working at his computer store. So we get a cut of Mr. Robot, and he's using a floppy disk. And for those of you who don't know, or are not inclined, this is a floppy disk. This is actually a coaster, but it is made to represent a real-life floppy disk, which no longer exists, but these were these little things that you insert into the computer to save files and images on, and boy, those were fun. Mr. Robot picks up the phone with a client about, says, bring in your computer, we'll replace the motherboard. He's like, we got this new Pentium processor, bring her on in, we'll be all set. So while he's talking to this customer, a guy storms in, and he must have just finished up a sale here, because Mr. Robot says, like, what's wrong, is the mouse not working? He's like, what's going on, why are you back at my shop? The guy says, your son stole money from me. Mr. Robot's like, I'm sorry? He says, I specifically had 3 20s in my wallet, and now I have 1. He says, your son was standing directly behind me when my money was on the table. And Mr. Robot says, whoa, let me see if I can figure things out. Like, calm down here. Like slow your roll, buddy. And the guy says, I don't give a shit. He goes, I want my fucking money and I want an apology. And then, so that's when Mr. Robot kind of goes, okay, I see the type of guy I'm dealing with here. And he goes, there's no need for that. He's basically telling him to calm down. And the guy says, I don't have time for this. He's like, are you going to give me my money back or not? And Mr. Robot says, no. The answer is no. And the guy's like, huh? Excuse me? He's like, are you being serious right now? And Mr. Robot says, I can't help you. And he's got his newspaper up, he's reading his newspaper. The guy's kind of standing there because he was demanding his money, thought he was going to be a big tough guy, come in here. And Mr. Robot's like, no, I'm not going to give you your money back. And the guy says, you're really just going to sit there and lie? He goes, I should call the cops. And he goes, what an example you're setting. I earned my money and you're just teaching him to steal? He goes, you're a terrible father. And that's when Mr. Robot puts his newspaper down and he says, sir, I'm going to need you to leave. And the guy says, you're a nobody. You're a middle-aged man doing what my retarded nephew could do. At any time you bring in the word retarded, you are a piece of work. And I was like, okay, guy. And it's clear this guy is just an asshole and just a piece of shit. So he says, you know what, keep your 20. And he goes, I'll just go to Best Buy from now on. And I'm like, shout out to Best Buy, because they are great. And their app is great too. And then there's actually a sign that says Best Buy next to Mr. Robot's head there. Not actually referring to the company Best Buy, but just a fun little tidbit there. And so the guy leaves, and Mr. Robot says, come on out. And then that's when we get a young Elliot coming out from the back door, or like the storage area. And he says, Dad, I didn't do it. Mr. Robot says, let me see it. And young Elliot slowly hands over the $20 bill. So he did steal it. And Elliot says he thinks he's in trouble. And if there's silence there, and Mr. Robot says, okay, Time Cop or Stargate? And then Elliot's kind of looking at him, and Mr. Robot just goes, what? $20 should cover the both of us. And then young Elliot just points to Pulp Fiction. And he goes, Pulp Fiction, never heard of it. And I was like, Pulp Fiction, great callback, amazing movie. One of Quentin Tarantino's best movies, so please go watch Pulp Fiction if you haven't done that. You're doing yourself a disservice. So he goes, okay, go get your jacket. And Elliot goes to the back room, gets his jacket, and this is when Mr. Robot goes into a bit of a coughing fit, so it's kind of signifying his illness there. And young Elliot says, how come I'm not in trouble? And Mr. Robot says, even though what you did was wrong, you're still a good kid. And he goes, and that guy was a prick. And he says, sometimes that matters more. And then he's like, come on, I don't want to be late for the movie. We've got 15 minutes to get there. And then they leave the store and we get the Mr. Robot title card, but not really the title card. We actually get the top of the store named Mr. Robot. I think this is the only time in the series where we don't get the Mr. Robot font. This font that pops up there. Really, really cool because it's the Mr. Robot computer repair shop that pops up there. And then we get a time lapse of this shop turning into a Bergen dry cleaners. And then a Washington Township Flowers. And then a Needle Time tattoo. And then finally a Bank of E Corp ATM. And the music here kind of very dark and foreboding, really good for a penultimate episode, kind of building everything up, and this is all kind of happening at once here. So we cut to Elliot looking at the camera, and he says to us, the audience, it's really him. And then out loud he says, it's really you. And Mr. Robot is sitting across from him in his apartment, smoking a cigarette. He says, never been to your apartment before. It's nice, but a little messy. And then he goes, it's not earth-shattering news. You never did like cleaning your room. And Elliot's sitting across from Mr. Robot, and he just says, Jesus fucking Christ, I can't believe it's really you. And Mr. Robot says, I was beginning to wonder how long it would take before you'd recognize me. And he goes, the fact that you've stopped recognizing Darlene too, he's like, I gotta be honest, it's a little disconcerting. And Elliot flips the table, and he grabs Mr. Robot, and he pins Mr. Robot against the wall here. And he screams at him. He says, why didn't you say anything? Why didn't you tell me this whole time? And then Mr. Robot says, Elliot, you are not well. And he says, I was trying to handle it gently. And Elliot says, gently? Gently? He says, is this what the last 3 months have been? Mr. Robot says, it's been about us doing something important. That's what it still needs to be about. And Elliot says, you died. You died. He's like, you're dead. He's like, well, you shouldn't be here. Like, what's happening? He can't believe what's happening in front of him. And he goes, you're dead. And he kind of yells it at him. And Mr. Robot says, I suggest you lower your voice. And Mr. Robot says, Elliot, you don't want them to hear us. And he says, especially after my impromptu visit from Tyrell Relic last night. He says, there are people out there that do not want us to work together. This is sort of a big picture moment. Again, we're going to go back at the very end of the series and see there's a bigger meaning to this than just in the moment. So there's a man in the black SUV looking street level here. Elliot asks Mr. Robot if, is that why they've been following me? Because of you? And Mr. Robot says, think about it. You don't remember me. You don't remember your goddamn sister. He goes, you see that shrink? Pop their pills. They intentionally put you in this haze with whatever brain matter you have left in there. And he says, you forget what they want you to forget. And he says, they're trying to control you, Elliot. And he says, they've been trying to control you all along. And Elliot repeats that to himself. He says, this is crazy, you're crazy. What's going on here? He says, who's trying to control me? Mr. Robot says, he says, there are people out there that don't want me alive. And he goes, the people who are afraid of us. And he says, we have to be more careful now, more than ever. And he goes, I will explain everything, but tonight we have to stick to the plan. It's not safe to discuss here. And Elliot screams, and he says, I don't give a shit. He says, and this is a look at just a very, very unhinged Elliot. Very clear, like something is not right with Elliot here. And then kind of a sad moment, Elliot's nearly crying, or he's kind of breaking down, he's just exhausted. And he says, tell me what the fuck is going on. So Mr. Robot says, all right, come on, let's go. And he goes, and Mr. Robot, Elliot's looking at him, and Mr. Robot just says, you want answers? Stop asking questions and follow me. So we cut to Gideon and his partner Harry in their apartment. Really, really sweet moment here. Harry's making a breakfast in bed. He says, "You're going too fast." And Gideon's like, "I don't think that's the problem." As he's like kind of getting dressed for work and he says he's got to go, Harry's like, "What's going on with you?" And Gideon says, "You know, it's all over the news." He says, "We're a cybersecurity company and we've been hacked." He's like, "Normal companies would be fine, but we're hanging on by a thread. We can't afford that." He says, we're hanging on by a thread, or maybe we've already fallen off a cliff and I'm just grasping to hold on to something. And then he goes, "I'm a failure." There's a really, really sweet moment here where Harry says, you know, he would die a happy man right now just because of this moment. And he goes, "This isn't what failure looks like." And I was like, that's so sweet. So Angela shows up at the lawyer's office where she's told news that Colby's confession is about to break there. She's like, "Good job, you should be proud." And then the lawyer goes, "Shouldn't you be at work?" And Angela says, "Oh, I quit." And the lawyer just gives her like a look like, "Oh man, dude, you shouldn't have quit your job." And she says, "Angela, you can't work here." She goes, "I don't want you here. I'm not here so you can find purpose for your life." And Angela's kind of devastated at this news. She thought she could just quit Allsafe and come work here, and that's not how it's working. And she says, "After what I did, I'm not going to be able to find a job in tech." She's like, "The lawsuit money won't come in for years." And I'm like, "Well, Angela, maybe you should have thought about that before you did all that shit. Like, maybe you should have done, like, I know it's the right thing to do, but, you know, maybe if you can't make a living now, you should have thought about that before just testifying against Terry Colby and quitting your job." So, you know, maybe think about that first. So Darlene calls Angela, or Angela picks up the phone. She has another number, and Darlene's like, "Hey, it's me. I can't find Elliot. Do you know where he is? He's freaking out again. He tried to kiss me last night." And that's when Angela and Darlene end up in like an old museum with a big world map there. And she says, "You know, this is where our old hiding spot used to be. This is where Elliot would always be. He's not here. I'm not sure where he would be." And there's a really cool conversation here where Angela says, "You know, I can't help you. I don't really know Elliot anymore." And Darlene's like, "Look, don't worry. We just need to talk to Elliot." And Angela says, "Yeah, well, he doesn't want to talk back. And when he does talk, it's just a bunch of lies." She says, "We can't keep protecting him from himself, Darlene." So Darlene kind of fights back at this, but Angela says, "Why do you even care?" She says, "You guys were never that close. In fact, he was doing just fine until you moved back into the city." And this is kind of hinting at a bigger thing. We haven't really heard about Elliot and Darlene's relationship. I mean, we just found out last episode that Darlene is his sister, so now we're getting more into that past, and now apparently Elliot and Darlene weren't very close, and Darlene may have moved away and moved back, so it's really cool world building here. Darlene says, "Look, you need to back off. He's my brother and I'm just trying to help. That requires no explanation." She's like, you're treading on thin ice here. Angela says, "If you don't want to tell me what's really going on here, that's fine, but just stop asking me for help." And this is kind of a hint at a bigger picture. What's going on. Also, the audience is trying to figure out what's going on in a bigger picture, and so is Angela, and she's trying to find out just as much from Darlene as we are. So we cut to a hooded Elliot and Mr. Robot waiting at a train station where Mr. Robot is like, "Do you remember this?" And he's like, "Of course I remember." He's like, "I even remember my game I used to play." And he says, "I calculate the probability of safety for each train car based on how often they would derail." And he says, "On the way there, I'd always pick the safest car because I look forward to our trips to the city so much." Sad moment with Elliot and his dad. And he says, "And then on the way back, I'd pick the most dangerous ones because I hated going home." And just really sad statement there of like a broken home, maybe a hint at like domestic violence or abuse, and it's just too bad that like an innocent child would do something like that. Mr. Robot says, "You know, she's not there anymore, Elliot." And we don't know if he's referring to like his mom or Darlene or what's going on there. Again, hinting at maybe kind of a poor relationship between Elliot and Darlene. And he says, "You know, we can't see Darlene right now. It's too risky. I know you're confused. I'm going to show you exactly where I've been this whole time." So Elliot's talking to us. He says, I know you don't trust me, but I'm remembering more and more now. Eventually I'll be back to normal, except for the fact that my dead father isn't really dead, and he's sitting across from me right now. And this is Elliot on the train, and then there's a cut to Christian Slater as Mr. Robot there, kind of like, here we go, on the train. So then we get Joanna and Tyrell in the hospital with their newborn baby after she induced labor from stabbing herself with a pickle knife. But their baby apparently is fine. She goes, this baby kind of looks like her. And Tyrell's like, I don't know what you're talking about. Who's her? And Joanna says, she tells a story about, there was this family and their parents were nice and she was 15. And the story is kind of confusing, but I'm like, did Joanna murder a newborn baby when she was 15 years old? I don't know. We don't really go into more detail, but it's kind of implied there that she did something nefarious when she was 15, and there was a newborn baby that looks like their child now. So that's we'll come back to that, I hope. Or I'm not even sure if we will. But then she just drops a bomb on Tyrell and she says, I don't want you anymore. She's like, I no longer want you. And she goes, if you wish to stay in this family, you need to fix this. And Tyrell is kind of like, damn, dude, I'm over here like doing everything I can for you and you're just throwing me to the curb. So Joanna's kind of she's with him side by side, but maybe because Tyrell is unraveling so fast and she said, don't unravel now, we've come so far, she's kind of seeing through the weeds here and she's like, I don't know if this is going to work out. So Joanna may be trying to get out before she gets into real legal trouble there. So then we cut to Blank's disc, where last episode we had the meeting with White Rose there, and there's been a bad fire. The whole front of the building is all burned up. Gideon shows up and he says, I know the owner, let me through. And he talks to the guy and he says, what happened here? The owner's like, I don't know, I was out of town for one day, and they said it was an electrical fire. Obviously this was set up by Dark Army to get him out of town or to make him leave before burning everything. And Gideon says, I came by to pick up some tapes or some disk drives that my employees dropped off yesterday, and the owner's like, I'm sorry, everything is gone. Like, everything's burnt up. And Gideon's very concerned, and he's just not doing well this episode. So then we cut back to a Tyrell getting back to work. He's very determined. He kind of walks in his office, and he guns it right for his computer there. And Philip Price is waiting on his couch, and he kind of scares him. He's like, oh, is it a boy or a girl? And Tyrell's like, Jesus, dude, you're just sitting in the couch in my office? Like, and he says, oh, it's a boy. And he's like, congratulations. And then Tyrell's like, oh. And his eyes are kind of all like, he's got bags under his eyes, and there's good makeup here where he looks all disheveled. And Tyrell just says, oh, thank you for the flowers. And then Philip Price is like, oh, kind of a dick move here. He's like, oh, it wasn't me that sent the flowers, it was my assistant. Like, he's like, I don't give a shit about you enough to send you flowers myself. But then we find out the real reason why Philip Price is here, as he's like, Tyrell, take a seat. And they have a conversation here where he says, obviously the company is in a fragile state. Scott is devastated. Tyrell starts to beg, yes, I can't imagine. And then Philip cuts him off. And he goes, the police have informed me that you are a person of interest. And he kind of laughs it off like it's this ridiculous claim. And Tyrell's like, and he's obviously concerned with this, but he's kind of like, that he knows that they're onto him, but he's kind of trying to be like, a person of interest, me? And he says, Philip Price says their suspicions are based on information Scott gave them regarding advances he made on Sharon. And so Philip's starting to be like, I don't know if this Tyrell Wellick is such a good guy. And he goes, look, Tyrell, he's like, I know you and Scott had your own competitive rivalry, and I'm sure Scott is just lashing out. He goes, I doubt your involvement, but the problem remains. And then he leans into the camera and he says, Scott will continue here. You, I'm afraid, cannot. And so he's firing him right here. Tyrell gives a long, focused stare, and then he kind of looks away from the camera and looks back. The music is picking up here. And then this is where we get the Tyrell Wellick music. The same kind of beat, the hot, like, techno beat from episode 3 where he's doing the speech in the mirror. Kind of picks up, and this is just the Tyrell Wellick theme song, apparently. But it really intensifies the scene here. Tyrell says, very calmly, he says, after it looks like he wants to scream through the camera, he says, "I'm not sure what you're saying, Philip." Philip Price gives a laugh here. He goes, "You know exactly what I'm saying." And this is when the music picks up again. Tyrell, still in a very calm voice, he says, "Philip, you can't do this." And he goes, "You can't." And he screams, "You can't." And he goes, "I've killed myself for this company and I was promoted faster than anyone else." And at this point, Tyrell's screaming. Philip gets up in the middle and he's like, kind of like, "All right, like we thought we were going to handle this professionally and now you're just yelling at me." And Philip gets up, he kind of laughs, and he goes, "I tried picturing your reaction." He goes, "I seldom have time for such imagining." But he says, "But I was curious and found all of the different versions quite interesting, I'll admit." And then Philip Price says, "But now, confronted with reality, I have to say I'm disappointed." And Tyrell is now kind of begging Philip Price. He says, "Please, I was on a track." He's like, "Don't do this." And Philip says, "Tyrell, there was a moment, a point in your recent past, a mistake, a compulsion, a decision, something," he goes, "that led you to this point right now." And he goes, "My only advice to you," he goes, "find that moment, understand it. It's the only way to reconcile this failure with yourself." And then this is when Philip puts his hand on Tyrell's shoulder, and Tyrell kind of clutches it with both hands here, kind of clinging on for dear life. And he's just completely unraveling here, and you can see Tyrell is just on a downward spiral. Tyrell knows he's gone. So the next scene we get is Tyrell kind of storming out of the building or in the lobby at the first floor, and he's walking quickly. He's kind of pissed off, and then the two detectives come by, and they're like, "Mr. Wellick, you can't keep avoiding us." And he just says, "If you have any questions, contact my lawyer. If you have any evidence against me, charge me." Like, he's like, "Bro, not today." So then we cut to Elliot and Mr. Robot showing up in their childhood home. And Mr. Robot says, "This is not the detour I was expecting here." He's like, "Come on, these people are going to be home soon. It's not the best time for B&E. And Elliot says, "This is where it happened. This is where it happened, isn't it?" And he's like, "Where what happened?" He's like, "What are you talking about?" And Elliot just grabs Mr. Robot and he pushes him back to the window so it smashes through the window. And he says, "You pushed me out that window. You pushed me off the boardwalk." He's like, "I was 8 years old." And Mr. Robot says, "You need to calm down. It was an accident." Mr. Robot says, "Elliot, you felt guilty and you thought you deserved it." He's like, "You felt guilty about this your whole life, about telling people about my secret." And he goes, "Please, Elliot, you have to stop being angry at yourself." And Elliot says, "You're right. I'm ready to let go and stop being angry." And he's like, "I just need to let go." And then he lets go and Mr. Robot falls out of the window. So we cut to Angela refreshing her page, looking for Terry Colby, confession news, like kind of constantly, obsessively refreshing Google. And her dad gets home and he says, "You didn't tell me Darlene was back in town." And she's like, "Darlene? Where did you see Darlene?" He's like, "I think it was Darlene." And then that's the end of that scene. We cut to Gideon at his desk, back at Allsafe, saying, talking to the IT guy for the honeypot. He says, the honeypot needs to remain up. The IT guy's like, "Dude, I have the request from your computer yesterday." And he's like, "Okay, but what I'm trying to tell you, Jim, is that our network was compromised yesterday." And I was like, "Damn, Jim, it's not Jim's fault. It's someone who works tech support, customer service. Like, don't be yelling at Jim, okay? All Jim's doing is processing the request from Gideon's credentials." But Gideon here, understandably, like, as the last episode's title, Unraveling, for my title here, this continues in this episode. Tyrell is clearly in a downward spiral, unraveling. Gideon is clearly unraveling here from the beginning of the episode to go into Blank's disc. He knows Allsafe is kind of screwed. Now he gets back to work. He finds that the honeypot isn't working, or it's set to be taken down. He's unraveling here. Elliot thinks he's crazy. All of our main characters pretty much are just losing it, and they're all just on bad paths. So that makes for a really interesting dynamic. So Gideon says, "I need you to keep that honeypot active." And the IT guy says, "I can't do that, sir. We have specific orders from Tyrell Wellick to keep the request as it is." So we cut back to Angela showing up to Elliot's childhood home. She's like, "Hello, is anyone home?" And Darlene's already there. So she runs into Darlene. Darlene says, "The new family here is really weird. They have a really weird dad. but they haven't changed much for the home. Angela's like, yeah, I haven't been here in so long, but she's like, it's true, the layout is the same here. So then the weird dad gets home. They have to like run out the back door, which is kind of a weird scene, because they literally run out the balcony, and like the dad like comes out and like looks around. They're like hiding behind a bush, or behind like a trash can. And Darlene says, I really should be more open with you. I shouldn't have been so hard on you. And then she goes, you're family. And so we're like, whoa, like Angela is now family too? It's like, who isn't related to Elliot at this point? But again, this is just building towards a bigger world, a bigger picture here. So as they're leaving, they notice the broken glass from the window, and they look up, and she's like, isn't that Elliot's old room? And that's when they all go to the cemetery, where Mr. Robot is initially talking to Elliot. And Mr. Robot, as Angela and Darlene are approaching, he says, it won't be long now. And he turns to Elliot and he says, son, they tried to protect you, but they caught up to us. Elliot's like, what are you talking about? That's just Darlene and Angela. And Mr. Robot says, no matter what happens, I will always be there. They are not going to break us apart again. And he goes, listen to me because we don't have much time. They are going to try and get rid of me again. I need you to not let them. And Elliot's like, why would they try and get rid of you? Mr. Robot says, please, Elliot, just listen to me. And then he grabs his face, and it's a really sweet scene here. Really good acting by Christian Slater. Mr. Robot grabs Elliot's face, and he says, please, Elliot, just listen to me. I will never leave you alone again. I love you, son.
I will never leave you. I will never leave you alone again. I love you, son.
And Mr. Robot slowly slumps down to the tombstone here. Angela and Darlene show up. Elliot's like, what is he talking about? Please tell me. I need to know. I want to know. And Darlene's like, they're looking at him concerned, and they go, Elliot, what are you doing here? And Elliot's like, don't you see him? Didn't you see him? And they're like, who? Who are you talking about? And then Elliot to us says, he's kind of freaking out. He's got his hands on his head. He's like, this can't be happening. This can't be happening. This can't be happening. And then he says, this is happening, isn't it? And he's like, you knew all along, didn't you? And Angela says, Elliot, who do you think you've been talking to? And then Elliot to us says, you're going to make me say it, aren't you? And then he says, I am Mr. Robot. You are Mr. Robot? Like, damn, dude, this show has just bomb after bomb after bomb. And at this point, as a viewer, you're wondering what's going on. Is he his dad? Is he Mr. Robot? What's going on here? At least here we're hinting that Mr. Robot is Elliot. This is kind of a big reveal where he's in his head, sort of like a second persona. And so he's been seeing Mr. Robot, but nobody else can see him. But then that begs the question of, why is Tyrell Wellick seeing Mr. Robot? Who knows? We'll find out. So we get back to the train station where Angela says, you're going to be okay. And Hooded Elliot says, I think I'm pretty fucking far from okay. And they hug, and Angela says, I'm kind of envious of you. I wish I could talk to my mom again, even if she's not real. And Angela says, take care of yourself. And she kind of goes on her own way. We get a shot here in the train of Darlene and Elliot heading back home. Darlene says, I need to know if you remember when we first started this whole thing, when we first started F Society. She's like, I need to know given what we're doing here. So we cut to Tyrell's office being cleared out. Gideon shows up and he's looking for Tyrell. And she's like, oh no, he was let go. I don't know why, but he wasn't, the best person to work with. And Gideon's like, that's fine. Let me just talk to Scott Knowles. And his assistant or his receptionist is like, oh, honey. Oh, you haven't heard? And then obviously she informs him on Sharon's death and kind of what's going on there. Off camera. And so then we get Angela arriving back at her dad's house where Terry Colby is talking to her dad. And Terry Colby's shown up with a couple of his bodyguards here. Her dad is kind of talking to him, and he leaves the room, and he looks kind of disappointed, and he's like, you guys can talk. And Terry Colby basically says, I'm not here to offer you a job at E-Corp. She's like, Angel's like, are you kidding me? You're offering me a job at E-Corp, the company that I'm currently suing, and the company that killed my mother? She's like, why would I ever work there? And Terry Colby's like, look, what you pulled off here makes you a very smart businesswoman. He's like, I know a few people that would love to have you. And he's like, I can get you a very lucrative offer as a job. And we already got the scene earlier where Angela knows that she's not going to get any other offers from the other tech companies, so this is kind of her one shot. She thought she was screwed. Now she's going to get to a very lucrative job, but it's going to be at the company she hates. So it's kind of a crossroads there. Does she choose the money over her morals or her values? We'll see. But Terry Colby's like, look, these guys don't wait around for anybody. I need to know by tomorrow. Before that scene is over, there is a nice little bit here where Terry Colby says, like, every fast food restaurant is handing out diabetes. He's like, we're all doing enough damage to the planet that's irreparable. He's like, you need to stop taking all these things so personally. And then he says, suggestion for you, if you want to change things, perhaps you should try from within. Again, big picture item here, but this is cool because it's kind of a double. He's giving Angela advice, but also we're going to go back to this at the end. He goes, because this is what happens on the outside. Again, applies to the entire series. So we go back to Elliot's apartment. Darlene and Elliot are there. Darlene finds a drawer of empty pill bottles, and she's like, so what, are you just filling these up and dumping them? Elliot's like, what? Elliot's kind of looking up at the camera. He's on his couch, kind of in his own mind there, or zoned out. He goes, what does it matter? I don't even know what's real anymore. And he goes, maybe we should stop the plan and stop the hack. Darlene's like, are you kidding me? No, as soon as Dark Army's back on, we'll be good to go. And he's like, but it wasn't me. He says, it wasn't the whole time. It wasn't really me doing all of that. And Darlene says, Elliot, the reasons we wanted to do this, the reasons we all want to do this are real. And she says, maybe you don't realize this, but this was your idea. And she goes, there's a part of you somewhere deep down inside that knows this is the right thing to do. And then she says she's going to get his meds there, and she's like, we'll talk more after she leaves. And then Elliot's door slowly opens, and hello, Tyrell Wellick. Tyrell Wellick shows up here. Elliot's like, what are you doing here? He's like, shh. He's like, hush, child. And Tyrell says, Elliot, I know you're behind everything, the honeypot, the hack, all that. He's like, you're the one constant in a sea of variables. And he says, I don't know what your grand plan is, but I need to know, but he's like, I need to know it, and you're going to tell me. And then this is when the Tyrell gloves come back, where he starts putting on his, almost his surgical gloves here. And he goes, Elliot's kind of standing there, like, shocked, and Tyrell just says, 2 days ago I strangled a woman to death, just with my bare hands. And he goes, it's a strange sensation. Something so tremendous done by something so simple. And he says, the first 10 seconds are uncomfortable, but after that, absolute power. And he says, that moment stayed with me. And then he gets up and gets in Elliot's face. And he says, I thought I'd feel guilty being a murderer. He's like, I don't. And then he says, I feel wonder. And then, hello, we get the song Where Is My Mind, the piano version by Marcin Sirin. And this, I remember this part. This is one of my favorite, probably my favorite moment from season 1 of Mr. Robot, where we get this amazing cover of Where's My Mind here. Beautiful, beautiful song. And then we get this great montage where we cut to the F Society headquarters, and there's the shot of the lights going on here, slowly turning on there. And Tyrell says, how long has this been going on? Elliot says, I don't know. And Tyrell says, and what is it that you're doing exactly? Elliot says, encrypting all of the files. And he says, all of E-Corp's financial records will be impossible to access. And then he says, the encryption key will self-delete after the process is complete. Tyrell says, wow, you really thought of everything, have you? And they bring up Steel Mountain. And he goes, who else was involved? And Elliot goes, just me? And obviously that's not the case here, but now we don't know what to believe. This is where the plot really excels here, and this is where the whole show of Mr. Robot as a whole is kind of like, what's going on? Who do we believe? We don't know what we're seeing, if that's real, if that's not, if that's all in Elliot's mind, if it's, part of the show, if there's plot twists. We don't know what the hell's going on. We don't know what to believe. Anything on screen could be an illusion. And Tyrell's kind of saying, like, okay, I'm here to help. So Tyrell just says, now it's just you and me. And he goes, I knew we'd always end up working together. But he's like, but I have to ask. He's like, why'd you do it? And he goes, what did you hope to accomplish by doing all this? And Elliot says, I don't know. And he just turns and he goes, I wanted to save the world. You get the popcorn pop, end credits. Okay, so for this episode, this is my favorite episode outside of the pilot. I know I keep saying outside of the pilot. The pilot I think is so perfect, and I don't know if I was just on the high of reviewing the show, but I think that's pretty much a perfect episode through and through. This one comes damn close. It is a 9.8. I'm going to give it because I think this is my favorite episode of the season. The ending sequence with the Where's My Mind. When I initially watched this a few years ago, Where's My Mind, I put on my Spotify. I listened to that all the time. Beautiful, beautiful segment here, and I was really excited. Once Tyrell showed up, I knew it was this episode. Amazing sequence. From start to finish, the episode really doesn't miss a beat. It's really exciting, and it really builds towards the bigger plot. The reason I like this one the most is because a lot of the dialogue is really, really impactful here. And pretty much all the dialogue is like almost, I don't know if double entendre is the right word, but it has a dual meaning where, yes, it applies to the scene, but knowing what I know after watching the whole series, and we will dig deep, deep, deep into this at the end, there's so much foreshadowing here that where there are lines that in the episode I go, oh, that's a cool line. But now seeing that line, I'm like, wow, I can't believe that in episode 9 of season 1, all of that was laid out for what I call this episode, the grand plan, which this whole series really is a grand plan. And we dig into that. A lot of the characters asking Elliot, what's your plan? What's your plan? I don't want to spoil anything or go into it, but yeah, we had a little bit of everything in here between Angela getting a job offer after her being rejected there, Elliot running away, Elliot and Mr. Robot going to his childhood home, pushing them out. Just a whole bunch of really, really good stuff here. Tyrell continuing to unravel the rift between him and Joanna, going through there. Tyrell trying to avoid the detectives there and him losing his job. Tyrell now being unemployed and then meeting up with Elliot at the end. All awesome stuff. My favorite episode of season 1 so far. That's why I'm going to give it a 9.8. The White Rose Award, I'm going to give this one to Rami Malek. I think it's a return to form for him. Again, as these episodes go on, the whole cast is so strong. I thought about giving this one to Martin Wallstrom as Tyrell, but I think this episode is about Rami and about Elliot from the beginning. And the cast is so strong between Mr. Robot and Tyrell and Elliot and even Darlene and Angela. But I think Rami stood out the most here. I think this episode is all about Elliot from start to finish, whether it's young Elliot in Mr. Robot store or going through his trials and tribulations here, losing his mind, trying to get that back together, finding out he is Mr. Robot. All about Elliot Alderson, and that's why I'm going to give this White Rose to Rami, who does an excellent job as always. Okay, so that's it, guys. So I hope you join me next week for season 1, the season 1 finale, and then we are going to finally move on to season 2 there, and that's going to be 10 episodes in the books. And next week is going to be a little special because I'm going to have recap of the White Rose Awards. We're going to kind of go over the big moments in the series. Next week's episode probably going to be, as a season. Next week's episode probably going to be a little bit longer. I'm going to kind of recap season 1 as a whole, or just the big moments there and the big players, and we might have some extra footage in there as opposed to the episode by episode basis. But yeah, thank you guys so much for everything. Again, not to self-promote my own channel here, but Hello Friends is probably my favorite review, but we do have some other content on there now. Please go check out Wick Watch, which is my John Wick in review. And then please go also check out the Star Wars in review that I just posted. Jurassic Park is coming, Batman is coming, MCU in review as soon as I can meet up with a couple of buddies of mine for schedule wise. We're going to get that up and going there, so I know that's delayed, but stick with me, it's coming. And that's probably going to be one of my favorite ones to do. But yeah, thank you guys so much. I've had a blast doing this. I can't wait to wrap up season 1 next week, and looking forward to the bigger episodes and just as a whole, and super proud of this project. And yeah, thank you guys, and please like, comment, subscribe, ring that bell notification so you know whenever I post new content. And until next time, goodbye, friend.